The question we asked was why do people not? Why they don't see the signs of the mind generally? Why is that something that needs to be developed first, as the suttas would say?
Because the standard they use for measuring a thing to be a thing is whether or not you can attend to it or not, but you can't attend to the mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's not. It cannot be an object of your attention.
Yeah. You can only discern the sign or the context of the mind. So you.
Yeah. So why, or rather, what then? What maintains that standard of expecting, or rather regarding things to exist only if you can attend to them? Everything else subtler than that, it's sort of invisible. Why is that? Because people don't choose to do that, they are doing that.
I guess it's a view, like the scientific view, for example.
Sure, it's a view, but what maintains that view? Something needs to feed the view.
Being engaged in the senses,
exactly.
A lack of sense restraint.
Exactly. So engaging with the senses for the sake of pleasure, for the sake of avoiding pain, is why people can't see the signs of their mind. Even if they learn everything correctly, read the suttas, and it says the prerequisite for the right view is seeing the signs of your mind. They won't see that unless they have been sufficiently withdrawn from their senses. What else is then necessary? Say somebody is withdrawn from their senses. What else do they need to do in order to start even seeing? Seclusion. So that's another thing the sutta say. The one who is not dwelling secluded, that he can see the signs of the mind, that's not possible. So certain physical seclusion is necessary. Why is that? Why is physical seclusion necessary? In order to discern that background of your experience, that where your mind is. Why can't you see it when you're dwelling with company, in company? What's the incompatible aspect there?
Other people. You engage with, you sort of kind of pulled out to engage with others, there's a kind of pull to.
But could you say, but we are all observing noble silence, we are all quiet, we are all meditating, watching our breath or whatever, nobody's talking. Would that be sufficient?
There is the possibility of stepping out, basically, to engage, as he said.
Yeah. So, in other words, simply perception of others as others already prevents that solitude where you're just with yourself. So if a person were to start from that neutral position, as you often say, and then learn these things, then you could maybe, even in company, discern the background signs of your mind without these projected views and so on. But nobody starts in a neutral position. Everybody starts already with avidya, already with ignorance, already with everything else. So then you actually need to withdraw the other way more until certain things are recognized, such as that background sign of your mind. So where would you be looking for the signs of your mind practically? Say somebody is now sense restrained, guarding of the sense doors, dwelling alone for a good part of the day, is not spending time just constantly in company or with others or talking to others and so on. Where would you start? What would you look for?
Pressure and intentions.
Okay. But how would that reveal the mind? Or what would that reveal? See, spotting the signs of the mind, citta nimitta, as a necessary prerequisite for the right view. Where would those signs appear? We can say background, sure, peripheral, sure, but more specifically, okay, what the sutta say, what is the mind determined by? What is chitta determined by?
Perception and
Feeling.
Yeah. So where do your perception and feeling meet? Just in colloquial terms, where would you find what you perceive and what you feel?
Mood.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and mood is something, already something you cannot observe directly with your eyes, ears, nose. You can't feel it tactilely with sensations in your body. Yet you are under it.
It's like the weather.
It's like the weather. Yeah. So that's exactly what you would look for. Is their mood light or heavy, elevated or depressed, lustful or non-lustful, calm or disturbed, constricted or expanded? See, all of these are certain signs, i.e. properties, certain limiters of already where your mind is. So for somebody who doesn't see this mind at all or hasn't developed it, mood is pretty much what your mind is. That's like, if you go in that direction, you will learn more about the mind. But as we just said, you cannot go there simply by observing it with your kind of thoughts or senses, because it's always behind that. Doesn't matter how far back you travel in your like mentally in your mind, you're always going to remain within that mood. There's no outside of it. So you're subjected to it in as much as you're subjected to like a different weather. And then you just have to endure it when it's present, or ignore it if you don't like it, and so on. So, okay then, so say one is then looking in the direction of the moods. What signs and features would they be discovering on the level of that mood, let's say like that?
It's arisen by itself.
Is that something you learned or something you see? Or both?
No, yeah.
It's something you discern through what you're attending to. So you can't attend to the nimitta or the context, because otherwise there will be a context to that new thing that you're attending.
So what others then? What other signs would appear there on the level of the mood? What are the properties of any mood? Doesn't matter if it's good, bad, elevated, depressed. So okay, it's there on its own.
I'm subjected to it.
You're subjected to it. Yeah.
It's painful, the fact that it's...
But it might be very light, pleasant, agreeable, can't have enough of mood. Then it's not painful. So
It can change.
Sorry?
It can change.
Okay, yeah. So it's subject to change. So, and these are all factual properties, factual limiters of an enduring mood, whatever that mood might be at the time. You're not concerned with the content of the mood, but actually you want to see what are the characteristics of any mood, good or bad. So it's there on its own. You are the one subjected to it. It can change, exactly. And could you even conceive you preventing a mood from changing or not, or interfering with it from the outside? That's important. Any thought you might have in that direction, you're still within it, and that doesn't change. What's the other?
Yeah, it also sort of determines which actions are sort of possible and seem to make sense.
It inclines you in certain directions. You still have power of choice. You still have your mano, your intellect you can use.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's, if a depressed mood is sending you certain ways, you could still use your reasoning and say no to it. The choice always does remain on to you. But yeah, factually it is sloping, leaning, sending you in some directions. Good mood, again, sending you towards more of sensuality, more of this, more of carelessness, more of fun or whatever else. Bad mood sending you the other way. But the actions that come out of it, that's not on the mood. That's you accepting that direction and going with it. Why would a person do that? Why would a person, by default, that's what most people do, unless they have learned sufficiently enough from the suttas and then realize the value, no, I must restrain this. Why would a person just, by default, go with the direction that the mood is sending them to? If I'm angry, I would just be acting angrily. If I'm happy, I'll be loving everyone. If I'm depressed, I can't get out of bed. But I'm acting out. Whatever the mood is, whatever the weather, I'm just acting further. Why would a person do
It's
that?
the way of least resistance. It is what seems to make most sense against that background.
Yeah, and what is the way of least resistance? That's basically going with
Pleasure.
the grain.
It is
With
going
the flow.
with that mood.
Yeah, and that's exactly like what in Avijja, in Paticampada, results with. You go with the grain. That
Mhm.
the Anuloma Patiloma in the suttas, with the grain, against the grain. So, what is the main product of just going with the grain of your mood? What would that result in? What's the final result of unchecked sensuality, views, cravings, ownerships?
Suffering.
Okay, but that's really the symptom of the problem that then can make you turn around.
Upadana.
Upadana. What's the chief upadana?
That is outside of this.
No. The chief upadana.
Sense of self.
Sense of self. Yeah. So basically, people would still see that they're subjected to their mood. That they have no say. I mean, even a completely untrained mind would know, this bad mood, like, when is going to end? This anxiety for 2-3 days, or this depression, or even sometimes I get so excited and I lose control. But I would like to be in control. Yet they still identify with that mood, despite all the signs and features that are showing you otherwise. You still, that's me. That's what I am. That's who I am. Because behavior hasn't been checked. You've been going with the grain perpetually. And then this view that this completely different thing that I'm subjected under, often don't want to, yes, that's what I am. So you keep putting yourself first, and these blatant kind of indicators and limiters of that showing you the things that otherwise, you just don't see them. You don't take them rightly. And that's the simile of the cook we often mention. When the unskilled cook does not see the most obvious signs of the mind of the king's preferences and where the king leans on account of dishes he prepared, and that's why he's then subjected to the bad moods and ill will and everything else that king will punish him with. Because person not knowing these, not spotting these signs, then goes carelessly in these directions, and the mind just proliferates further, the weather worsens, the suffering increases, and they have to then take the results of that, the suffering, the pain. That's what the mind does. Because, the mind suffers. You suffer, not because of the world, not because of bad people, not because of suffering in the world. You suffer because your mind is turning against you. On certain occasions, when craving is present, that's what suffering is. Mind resisting itself, aversive towards itself. And that's the pain you feel. Presence of craving means presence of suffering. Craving is on the level of that peripheral background signs of the mind. So, you train the mind, you disown it correctly, or you disown yourself in regard to the mind, more accurately speaking, there's nothing to turn against. Then highway robbers can be chopping your limbs off, nothing to suffer for. Internally there is no anguish. There is no fear either.
That's the result of all of that, though.
Yeah, well, see, and all of that starts by discerning the signs of the mind. That can only be done on the basis of solitude, that can only be done on the basis of sense restraint, seeing the danger in the slightest fault, and dwelling restrained by the virtue of precepts, keeping the precepts. Yeah.
And that's why also perhaps keeping the precepts can experientially seem as quite dangerous to my identity, because being in a certain mood, something might feel like, okay, I can do that. I make some determination, I'm not going to do this. Then the mood changes, and then that previous determination doesn't make much sense anymore.
Exactly.
And that's where the struggle begins.
So then the guiding principle of your behavior then is still the mood, and your efforts are secondary to it. But if you actually take the precepts first and say, well, regardless of the mood, these things will not be done, you still don't see the mind, that wild, crazy animal you're subjected to, but actually you fenced it off. You don't know where it is specifically, but you know it was in this woodland last time, and you fenced it off. So you might not see it yet, but you know it cannot be outside of this, because you're not allowing it, basically. You're not opening the gates. And that's exactly how then you get closer to start discerning these signs. Because everybody, as I said, theoretically can read the sutta and says, oh yeah, the two factors for Sotapanna, and this is... Are you a Sotapanna then? Because it's not enough to have the information about what the factors of the right view is that I make sense of. No, factually, if that's understood, the right view needs to be resolved. So, signs of the minds are necessary prerequisite for basically becoming a Sotapanna, for developing that right view. And as we explained, that's exactly why. Because there is an underlying, completely gratuitous identification with those moods despite what they're showing you, and you won't be able to see that for yourself directly up until, you have sufficiently discerned this mind that endures in the background when you are in the solitude and not give in to breaking the precepts as a completely independent thing of you. Like, completely independent, yet you're fully within it. You cannot conceive existing without it. But you are the one subjected to it. And that's like seeing the nature of that gratuitous Attavada. Oh, I'm not the master and owner. I am second to this.
It's that part that people, because you can think, as you said, I have this mood or this bad mood or that good mood, and it's my mood, but you still put yourself as seeing something as something that could be
and you can even be
it.
This mind is wild and needs to be tamed an animal and all of that, and I see how it's independent and stuff. No, you see that on the level of information, that intellectual reasoning, and as I said, that's true in theory, but practically, unless pretty much you are disowning your Attavada, you are becoming Sotapanna, freeing yourself from the fetters. You are not really seeing what you're saying you're seeing, because that has to be the result. If truly discern signs of the mind seen correctly, the characteristic of its anicca, subject to its will, which is change, dukkha basically, then there will be no even most kind of subtlest abstract notions of ownership left there, because you understand the depth of that. Oh, this is unownable. This is not mine. And incidentally, that's what escape from it is. It's not getting rid of it or getting it under your control. It's removing the traces of ownership. And that's where all the sense restraint and virtue you understood now. You're not doing it on the level of external duty. You see it directly relevant. Because you realize, I can not keep the precepts, and then this crazy wild king will start stabbing me, hitting me, punishing me. I mean, I don't need to prove anything to myself. I already saw that this mind cannot be owned. Why don't I just protect this behavior so it can dwell peacefully? And I can be, why would I torment myself in those ways? You would see a direct relationship between certain acts and mind and certain mental inclinations, such as unwholesome acts and the inclinations of the mind that will then inevitably have to be felt as suffering. So, I'm out of this picture, there is no more Attavada involved, but factually, mind is still not quite completely free, so if I provide this unsuitable food for it, it will go wild and it will bite me. Sure, not as bad as before, because now I have tamed it or contained it to a degree, but it's still unpleasant. And I have no reason to do it. Why would I do it? I mean, it's not my problem, this mind. My problem is just so that mind doesn't torment me unnecessarily. So then the whole, the direct kind of relationship, insight, recognition between wholesome is wholesome, and why wholesome is wholesome, or rather why kusala is kusala. Kusala truly means beneficial. Why is certain behavior beneficial and why it's unbeneficial? Not because the Buddha said so, because literally beneficial behavior tames this crazy mind further. It will make king be my friend, who is in the power to crush me or make my life really miserable. Unbeneficial behavior will send him the other way. So I can choose to go either way, but I cannot unsee this now. The direct relationship between certain type of behavior and how the mind will incline and where it will slope and what it will do. And given that whether Putujana or somebody who practices towards arahantship has the same principle guiding their behavior, which is freedom from suffering, this is really not a choice, not much of a choice. You can get careless maybe and forget about a king if you got distracted or something, but fundamentally, once this is seen, a certain sphere of suffering has been abolished, because you couldn't possibly intentionally go there anymore. And thus the mind cannot cause you that much pain anymore. And that's the similar of the burning charcoal pit. Like once you're healed, like would you even consider going and using those burning embers on you again? No, that's just impossible.
Perhaps we should also clear up the difference between what we call mood and what people might think of as emotion, because they're not the same.
Yeah, so that's mood is on that kind of. Well, no, you tell me first. Why don't I let you speak a bit? What would the difference be, mood and emotion, or what general? Like again, it can mean different things for different people, but what would emotion mean for people here? What would be the difference?
Well, it seems to me more particular, like when there is an emotion, such as anger or jealousy or something else, that is still almost something that you can observe. It's not as concrete as material things in the world.
It can also have a bit of a concept in itself, but it is exactly that.
It's moving in that direction, so there will be a mood as a background to that, and this is what we're talking about here.
Yeah, so the mood is it's far more general, broad, higher than emotion or any specific thing. So it's that kind of overall state of mind you're under.
Perhaps one could even say emotion is somewhat defined by the objects in regards to which, like for example, there's aversion generally, but let's say if it's aversion in regards to somebody who has something else that you would like to have, is like jealousy, we would say, or aversion in regard to somebody who did something to you that you didn't like.
It is more specific basically.
More content oriented.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's oriented.
It revolves around the content more. So yeah, the mood is then that general, that background state of mind, and I guess also it's probably equally important to say that these characteristics that we discussed, you can obviously hear them talk, recognize, read, learn about it, and then try to see those things in the mood. And sure, you have to start somehow, but the point is to start seeing the mood on its own, enduring, independent of your attention. So whether you're attending to your mood or not, you are under it, and it can be for days, same mood. And you need to start recognizing that there is particular specific engagements, changes, distractions. Overall, it's still the same direction my mind leans to. And then start discerning. Once you start seeing it enduring on its own, dwelling in solitude, obviously not compromising precepts, then you could start seeing these features there, really, like discerning from the mood, not you putting it in the mood. So it's important to recognize that that's already a property of mood that people would not necessarily see. It continues to endure whether you look at it or not, whether you try to look at it or not, whether you try to attend it and figure it out or not, you are under it. 3 hours later you might try again, it's still the same mood, still enduring all this time. And that's already something that will be undermining those views of external, and I'm the point of view for all these external things happening in succession in front of me, and so on. But practically, you gotta have to restrain, which will amplify the mood, increase the pressure, increase that resistance, and then see that mood enduring, not give in, not spill out, not break the fence around the forest that you know the mind has to be within. And then you will start seeing its independence, its anicca, all these things on the level of that mind enduring. And all of those stand for signs of the mind. Because when the Buddha says chitta nimitta, they're not specific nimittas you gotta see. Anything that will stand for that chitta for you with the time. And that's then enough to recognize that complete unknowability of it.
Well, perhaps we should also clear up that because moods can endure for a while, but at the same time they're impermanent, and that's not a contradiction. So they change, and you can find yourself in.
Well, that's what impermanence means. It means subject to change.
Persisting.
Does not mean changing one every second or something like that.
Well,
it means it doesn't matter. It remains unchanged, but it will have to change.
Yes.
That's what anicca means.
And that's also then what you mentioned. Recognizing that it endures no matter if you attend it or not, like in the sense, now I forget about it, But then in
And
a
then I
couple
find
of
oh,
hours,
it's a new mood. No, it's not. It's the same mood.
exactly,
Yeah.
and that's then basically right mindfulness.
That's the beginning of it, yeah.
Yeah.
And then you might find, a few hours later, a new mood. Well, it's still a mood.
Exactly.
So that's what I said. You already stopped looking for the content of your mood. You're looking for the general characteristic of any mood. What is a common thread to any mood? So whether you forget about it, distract yourself, 5 hours later there is a pleasant mood now, doesn't matter. It means, oh, I'm still under the mood, which means it was unpleasant before, it will change again. So I better not get lost in the content of that, what that mood is directing me towards.
Yeah, and the more one recognizes that you can never be outside of a mood, the more that undercuts the assumption of self,
Yes.
because
yeah,
self
yeah.
is the idea
Yeah.
that you can precisely be independent.
And that's how one puts oneself outside of it, by forgetting that the mood endures there, whether you think about it or not, whether
Okay.
you endure it, whether you attend to it or not.
Yes.
And then you forget, and then next time you meet, you say, oh, I found this, so I've been outside of this. No, actually. So it's the way you remember it puts you outside of it gratuitously or not. And right mindfulness, the right memory. That's where the practice is, that's where the right view starts. The description of Sotapanna in the suttas is the one who sees skillful as skillful or good as good and unskillful as unskillful. He sees that for himself. No more external authority, the Buddha, the Sangha, other traditions telling you this is good. He sees for himself good as good. He recognizes it why it is good.
Yeah.
And as we described, this is why it's good, because it's directly related to the mind you are the kind of living under its will, under its own moods. Oh, so it's beneficial for my well-being or unbeneficial for my well-being. Either way, it's on me to basically allow it or not.
Just I see there's a relationship between what you were talking about at the beginning about solitude, as in the not only physical solitude, but like kind of having an attitude of solitude, because this good and bad is really, even if you don't think about it, is always good, kind of in the eyes of somebody or the eyes of others. So having that as an attitude, kind of thinking of things in relation to what other people do or what other people say or what somebody might say, or is just ultimately good because it's good because
yeah, those are kind of
others.
relatively good things.
Yeah.
Like what others you won't consider it because that in itself can make your life better or worse, hassle or not. But yeah, this is on the level of like a directly relating to where your mind will incline.
Exactly. So that
Yeah.
doesn't require any It's nothing
No,
about
no,
anybody
no.
else. That's the whole point.
No.
But
Just between you and the king.
it's
Nobody else can
Yeah,
come
yeah,
between
yeah.
that. Yeah.
and that's the difference as well, because then that's partly I think also why you need to be withdrawn from
others.
others.
Oh yes, sure,
Exactly.
sure. Because
That's
the see, it's already hard to see in itself. Because as I said, you already start with all the wrong views and assumptions and not from a neutral position. And then having the presence of others, external kind of your own perceptions associated with others, selves, attas here, attas there, ownership everywhere. Yeah, you're not gonna. So it has to be withdrawn. Then sure, an arhat then doesn't mind, as the Buddha said, can sit in any assembly of the devas or the kings. His internal composure doesn't change. There is no introduction of the old ignorances and assumption because that has been purified beforehand and got rid of. But until that's developed, a person should, exactly, as the other sutta says, protect his wound. So don't eat unsuitable food. Don't expose the wound to the sun because it will get reinfected. Cover it up. Keep it inside, away from the elements, i.e. secluded. Don't go, chasing sense objects and so on. Eat suitable things, don't eat unsuitable things. In other words, don't let your mind go in the unsuitable, don't let your thoughts, mano, go in the unsuitable directions. Don't welcome them, don't delight into them, and the mind will come down and heal up, and then it will be even easier. Because, again, ironically, that's why people go further into sensuality. It's because the pain that the mind causes. But they don't know that the problem, the pain, is rooted in the mind that's not free from craving. So then the only escape a person knows is go back to the pleasure the only pleasure I know, which is the pleasure of the senses. But even they go to sensuality because they want the same thing. They want this mind to not constantly cause them suffering.
Yeah, so they need to hear it, that they basically do not have another escape from
They
pain.
need to, well, they
Then
can hear it
sensual.
all they want. They need to stop engaging with any other form of escape that they know. That's why we keep saying you have to give up the management in order to see where the problem is and then deal with it there. Management will mean avoiding, shortcut.
Yes, but if this is altogether not pointed out, so to speak, then
Oh, yeah.
then the by default
Of course.
thing in relation to suffering will
Mhm.
be the sensual pleasure.
Yeah.
So somebody needs to present an alternative to that,
Needs
which
to
in the
hear.
beginning might not make much sense, but that needs to be worked on,
Yeah.
preferably in seclusion, in order to open up that possibility. And then the dependency on the sensual pleasures will diminish and eventually disappear.
Yeah, it needs to be done, exactly. So
Yeah.
out of faith, you can hear it, you can agree with it, you can so on, but unless you start doing it, because many people understand this on the level of information, that sensuality does not often escape, but they still engage with management. They still refuse to fully feel the weight of the mood that you're not acting out of towards getting rid of it. And they will have views that were justifying them doing that. Oh no, see, the Sutta says you get rid of, you abandon. Yeah, nobody denies getting rid of and abandon. What we disagree with is how you go about it. Do you get rid of it with aversion? Aversion with aversion? You reverse towards mind that's causing you suffering? Well, no, that's exactly why the mind will cause you to suffer. You can't have greed, aversion, or distraction anywhere else except on the basis of craving. Thus, you can't have greed, aversion, distraction and acting out of it without suffering. You will suffer because of the craving of it.
Okay, now how does someone who does not see for themselves the distinction between wholesome and unwholesome know what is in wholesome or unwholesome mood?
By the utterance of another, by learning about it accurately and knowing where to look for. Seeing the background, not what they're directly attending to from that background. Yoniso Manasikara, the womb of whatever you particularly engage with. That's why it was in the list here to talk about.
Yeah.
But I won't dedicate a whole separate talk to it because it's a bit too much. So you just stick to the mind. That's how they'll see it. So they kind of already see the background, and during that while I'm listening to you talking, and generally while I relate to my senses in my life, I'm not thoroughly, completely, entirely absorbed in the objects of my attention.
Yes.
And then if somebody starts talking about what else is there simultaneously present while you're attending this, or attending that, or acting towards this, or acting towards that, you get to see that there is something there truly that this could pertain to. So out of that faith, you would start doing it. And actually there's a sutta that says, one without faith to develop Yoniso Manasikara, not possible. So you need faith for that. And if the utterance of another is accurate, is properly understood, you're not looking for faults in it, you're not trying to defend your views against it, you're genuinely looking for a medicine that will cure you from craving, thus you cannot suffer ever, you will then take it on, consider it, and on the basis of that proper simultaneous recognition of the background of your experience, not just directly absorbed into the content and information and phrasing and so on, it will be enough for you to start, at least to look where is that woodland then where the mind would hide. The point is, wholesome and unwholesome is seen correctly. Why wholesome is wholesome and unwholesome is unwholesome. Not like there's some universal kind of truth that you discovered written, or this is why wholesome is always good and so on. No, you see, that's why wholesome, i.e. beneficial, is beneficial and unbeneficial is unbeneficial.
And if you have to describe that, then what would it be?
Which one?
Well, what is wholesome is wholesome.
We just did. Beneficial is beneficial because it will keep the mind, it will not direct the mind in the direction of increasing the passion, increasing the suffering, increasing the craving. It will not basically disrupt anger, the king, who will then punish you. That's why it's beneficial. It's beneficial to protect this behavior because it keeps the king, this crazy mind, semi-wild mind that I still, can't trust, keeps him content, keeps him calm, keeps him happy, keeps him predictable. Thus keeps me safe. Beneficial. As it happens, those things are things that are not rooted in greed, aversion, delusion. So, loving kindness is beneficial, it's good. Generosity is beneficial, it's good. Not acting out of anger is beneficial, and it's good. But this is primarily why it's beneficial, not because other people will like you on account of it, no, because the mind will not punish you on account of it. That's why it is good. So it happens that the whole world and society would also benefit from the same thing. But all those are secondary reasons. Consequently, the unbeneficial akusala things are things that would aggravate the mind further, that would infest the wound further. The one that the Buddha pulled the arrow out, but you still need to keep an eye on it until it heals. So the mind can still turn, kick and scream, if you keep subjecting it to distraction, sensuality, acting out of ill will, and you are careless. But if you're not, it will come down. And generally, you have to regard it as something that, you cannot be identified with, you are under, and any suffering, from the smallest you can imagine to the greatest possible anguish you can think of, will be caused by nothing other than that mind still being capable of craving against itself, not by losing everything there in the world and so on. That is literally nothing to do with the pain. It's the craving of the mind means presence of pain. No craving, no pain. The noble truth, this is the root of suffering in the entire cosmos, in all of the eons of existence, in the entire samsara. Nothing else. Presence of craving or absence of craving. So, you could now even take the principle further and say, beneficial things are the ones that do not increase the craving and prevent the future craving from arising, and unbeneficial ones are the ones that do the opposite. So, for your own welfare, for your own good, man seeking his own welfare, his own good, as I sort of say, you would recognize, because as I said, even wild, unrestrained person still wants the same thing, to not suffer on that level, fundamental level that he's subjected to. So if he comes to recognize the true reason for suffering, he cannot not heed it. And that's the whole point of the Four Noble Truths. You can't reverse that because it actually undermined all of the previous. It was the reason, craving was the reason for all of your previous actions and attempts at escape and management and so on. And now you found it. And now you see a direct connection between what contributes towards craving and what kind of makes it diminish without making things worse. And that's all to it, really. That's why it says, even Arahant, who is free completely from any possibility of that mind reappearing in a form of craving ever again, he still continues dwelling, secluded, guarding of the sense doors, because that's truly pleasant abiding here and now. It's actually truly agreeable to not engage with the senses, to not engage with the burning embers. And now he's removed any reason to do so, so he'll continue not doing so. Because the reason for doing so was that very craving that you tried to get rid of by making it worse. The leopard, the infected skin. You're itching, you're ripping it, scratching, gets you relief, but increases the scratching, increases the itch.
When the Buddha talks about crushing the mind with the mind, it's often interpreted, I think, in a way where the order is,
in order to crush the mind with the mind, you need to see what the mind is.
So it's crushing the context with the context, or the.
Well, yeah. It's crushing that background mood by not giving in to the wherever it leans to. But it's something you need to see enduring first. And again, how can you practice satipatthana? The people like to, or the people believe that leads to the right view. You can do it before you have the right view. You can practice mindfulness, the four foundations of mindfulness. When one of them is knowing all these basically ways the mind will be enduring there, and discerning it accurately without interfering with it, without trying to change it, he knows depressed mind is depressed mind, elated mind and elated mind. He knows mind of lust as mind of affected with lust or not affected. So already thoroughly versed in recognizing that wild elephant over there that you trapped, and then seeing it, how it endures in different moods, and all of that keeps hammering in the common thread of the mind, the common characteristics. That's the whole point. It's not, he knows the depressed mind is depressed mind, and then he does this and this and this and this and this to abandon the depressed mind. No, knowing it is enough, because as we said in the beginning, it's not about the content. So it's not whether your mind is depressed or elated or this or that. The fact is that mind that you are subjected to, that cannot be owned, that you gratuitously keep identifying yourself with, you want to keep hammering in those characteristics that will prevent you to keep identifying with. Anicca, dukkha, then anatta is the result. Cannot be atta anymore.
In that regard, taming and disowning is how is
Well,
that connected?
Yeah. What do you think? So how does taming, let's put it like this, can you tame your mind without disowning it? Or rather, can you disown it without taming it?
No, because you will be unable to endure the pressure that it exerts over you.
But can you tame it without disowning it? Can you do that?
I guess it comes together in a sense.
Well, it depends maybe what you mean by taming. You could...
Means basically not taming it, so it doesn't really turn towards craving as much, doesn't really attack you as much. It's actually calmer, like even listens to what food mano presents itself.
You might make a
Presents to it, sorry.
You can make a start taming the mind, well there is still some sense of ownership there.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
you can tame your mind without necessarily abandoning ownership, but obviously abandoning the ownership of it would be much easier if that mind is already tamed. And taming of the mind is what sati and samadhi is. So, you want to practice samadhi, you want to practice concentration, inverted commas, guard the sense doors, dwell in solitude, and observe the signs and features of the background moods that you are subjected to. That is the definition of samadhi and composure. Not ignore those things by focusing on one point in this nostril tip or something like that. That's quite the opposite. That's literally ignoring the behavior of the king and just focusing on the fork or his hand or his foot or this or that, so you don't see the unpleasant truth that's overwhelming you now. Or he's about to punch you. He's about to throw you in jail. But as long as I focus on this one point, I won't be aware of the bars around me. And that's not an escape.
Like it does provide some relief, but it requires constant maintenance, basically. And that's
In the same sense as we said, scratching
Exactly.
the infected itch provides a factual relief, but it's making it much worse.
Yeah.
See, you are making this worse. You're ignoring the king's hints and preferences. So he's going to be even more annoyed with you.
Mhm.
So next time he won't just put you in jail, he's going to give you 100 whips as well. Because this is the 100th time you're doing the same stupid thing. Yeah? That's where sensuality worsens. That's where preferences and chasing sensuality in that sense, or aversion, what makes things worse. Makes your mind even wilder, even more bitter, even sharper, pain, even people they've been acting out of anger their whole life, and they reach certain age and just perpetually bitter and angry, even when there's no reason anymore. Because you dug into the bone now, which you're scratching for these 30, 40, 50 years.
And so this one single phenomenon, the question
Yeah.
refers to is the sense of self. basically.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what it is. See, because of that sense of self, that you perpetuate, as we said, like the truth is like, despite all the signs and features of your mind, you're still like, this is, I am this is mine. Yeah, that's why mind has the unchecked reign over you. And anything that mind changes, you'll be under, because you took it through your ownership. So by removal, through seeing the independence of the mind, the anicca, the dukkha of it, all these characteristics, you will stop maintaining this idea that it's yours, that you are it. And that's it. That is unburdening you factually from the changes in that mind. Whichever way it goes, doesn't matter. But for as long as there is that identity, whichever way it goes, the burden will be on you.
Mhm.
That's why that the precept, the virtue guarding the sense door needs to be taken as a behavior regardless of the state of mind, regardless of what intentions you have and what you're inclined to do or not. No, this will not be done. So you find a common sort of principle that will now unite your behavior regardless of the mood.
Yeah, so you cannot act your way out of a certain mood,
No.
because it is mood that determines the action.
Yep, exactly.
So it's a perversion of the order, And then seeing that might also prevent unnecessary action and just endure the mind as mind.
And then unincline it. See, in Anapanasati Sutta, that's kind of the whole point. Again, we say so many times, how can you practice gladdening of the mind, experiencing the mind, expanding the mind, calming the mind, if you don't even see the mind? And if you see the mind correctly, you would at least be a Sotapanna. Thus, when a Sotapanna does Anapanasati, Sotapanna or higher does Anapanasati, he can, by that time, because he already has discerned his mind sufficiently as this an independent phenomenon that he's within. And then he can, okay, now let me just experience the mind, regardless of the specific state that mind is. Let me breathe in, let me breathe out while experiencing that mind, while re-familiarizing myself with the phenomenon of an enduring mind that I'm subjected to. And then let me gladden that mind. Let me make it lighter. Let me unincline it from these directions of sensuality. In other words, you are so skilled now to recognize these precursors to obvious kind of perceptions you can attend to. You're so skilled in recognizing these behaviors of a king even before king knows what he's about to do. You already see, because you watched it and learned so closely. Not through examination with your eyes, but through what? Through the Dhamma eye. See on the level of the mind. And then, you could then, basically, your mind wants to go here, wants to go there, but you are the one who sets up the direction and sends the mind in the right direction, in the right way. That's like the taming of the elephant so that you can train the elephant, so that it actually starts listening. So your chitta basically starts listening to what your well-restrained, thoroughly understood mano tells it to do. So what your intellect, what your recognition, what your kind of wisdom tells it to do, the mind that goes that way. And that's the practice of Anapanasati. That's what results in fortifying the four foundations of that right memory, mindfulness. We're talking about gladdening the mind and so on. So
liberating the mind.
Liberating the mind, yeah. So you can now, as I said, by being familiar with that phenomenon of enduring mind, discerning the slightest signs and features of it. You don't need big coarse moods to see where the mind is. The slightest signs and features, the slightest movements, so to speak, of neutral, undefined kind, it's enough for you to see the mind, to see the state of the mind even before the mind is aware of it, even before it has assumed the direction and so on. And that's pretty much, by that point, you'll be abandoning any 5 lower fetters. Because that level of being, that level of requirement of mind leaning is gone now. Because you got so used to seeing it even before, as I said. I mean, king doesn't move a little finger, you already know where this would go, so you either allow it or not. So all these little signs and features and tokens, all these inclinations, all these nimitters, all these foretellers of mind is about to, go and engage mentally, lean towards lust, and then you have to endure the pain of it. Now you're seeing that. Now you're seeing that even before the mind recognized those things were there. And then you turn it away. You send it the other way. And that's exactly the practice of, can the unarisen lust arise in me? And a skillful monk will recognize those little telltales. Am I welcoming? Am I with this unsuitable kind? So basically refining the principle of skillful is skillful, unskillful, and unskillful. Sotapanna has understood that as a principle, but hasn't understood the kind of subtler implications of it, because if he did, he would abandon even that, and then he'd be an anagami, or an arahant.
But when you say you recognize before the mind even sees or recognizes, so to say, how is that possible? How can you recognize before it's present, so to say, or is it present for you before it's present for the mind, or?
It's present for both, but you see the mind doesn't, because you see clearer. It's possible because you're not the mind. Mind is a separate thing enduring there with your sense of self. Now, obviously, if you're to the point of seeing the mind correctly, independence, that we talk about, that sense of self, is your not self. But that creature is still there, as the suttas refer to. That pugala, that individual, is still there. And he is the one who guards the mind. because that's pleasant here and now. And he's the one who has liberated the mind. So where the aggregates break apart of that individual, there will be no more rebirth. There will be no more taking up of things, because the mind has turned away from all of it. Because you made it turn away. You liberated it. That's why you know that it's liberated, because you did it. It didn't happen to you. And that's what the Sutta says. Oh, Arahant, he liberates you, and he knows, oh, it's liberated. So there is no doubt there anymore. The mind has turned away, gone. Through first taming it, then training it, then directing it, then gladdening it, then liberating it. And he has no desire to return anymore. Because the only reason he kept returning is because he wanted to be free from suffering, and returning was what was making it suffer. So, the vicious circle.